computer. Awesome. Okay, so I'm here with Jonathan Snipes, who was the composer and sound designer and a bunch of other things for the documentary "A Glitch in the Matrix," which explores the simulation theory. What if we're actually on a simulation like the Matrix, and then if we are, then how do we go forward with that knowledge, and how do we interact with the world knowing that? And then just to tell me a little bit more about yourself, you also have done a lot of work in theater, and you're a member of the rap hip hop group Clipping, right?
Yeah, yeah, all of those things are true.
Awesome. So how did you get on board with how did you get brought on board to A Glitch in the Matrix, and where in the production process did you begin to start the sound and the score? Like, was everything done post-production, or did you have discussions during the filming process?
Well, Rodney Asher, who made the film, and I, we go back a long ways at this point. We've done, I think this is our maybe fourth feature film together, um, and my third with him as sound supervisor. And as he put it once in a sort of casual conversation following the screening, we're married at this point. Like we have like I think I assume that I'm working on whatever he's working on, and he assumes that I'm along for the ride. So I actually am involved like long before a film is even greenlit with him. Like when it's just kind of an idea, because we chat regularly, and he'll just tell me sort of what he's scheming on and what he's working on. Because not all like give the way that he makes films, right, and the way that these documentaries kind of unfold, like not every idea ends up having enough sort of legs to even make a film out of. So by the
Hmm.
time that like a producer gets involved and it seems like it's going to turn into a real thing, we're actually quite far along in the process. And because we're having these conversations, I can kind of start really early on, even if it's just sort of thinking about and conceptualizing what the music and sound is going to be. Um, and yeah, and on this one, I mean, this one really was interesting too because so much of it is animated, that it didn't really feel like a film to me until kind of really near the very end, even though I'd been working on it for so long.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I don't know. Typically, the way I kind of I do compartmentalize a little bit, working on the sound and the music sort of at the same time. I try to say, well, am I in my music brain today or my sound brain? And of course, those are very similar. But I just for sanity's sake, you have to make a checklist and do certain things. Um, so I definitely started the music process a lot earlier than the kind of more typical sound design process, which I think had a more sort of more conventional sort of approach to this film. I really didn't dig into the sound design too much until we had more or less sort of a finished cut. But that gives me the opportunity to write a ton of music before we get to that point, right? And I mean, honestly, like musically, like I heard the title and I kind of had ideas about what it should sound like. Um, so I wrote a ton of music, sort of just not even to picture, having just heard little snippets of interviews and seen
Hmm.
little sort of bits of things, just kind of starting to guess at what the palette I might need would be. Um, so by the time we got into actually scene cuts, there was a lot of original music that I had made already in the temp score, and a lot of other stuff just sort of sitting around that hadn't found a home yet, which kind of gives me a leg up when we get into that final push.
Hmm. Um, you mentioned like your sound brain and your music brain, and since you wore so many hats during this film, composer, sound designer, sound supervisor. So I mean, how did any of them like kind of contradict each other, or did they complement each other? What was it? Did you have more creative wiggle room since you were doing basically like all the sound, or was there any conflict?
I mean, it's certainly more there are a lot of sort of like possibilities for integration and sort of synchronicities between those departments when it's all being done by the same person. It is a lot of work,
Hmm.
obviously. It's like a ton of work. And it's not a sort of a thing that I would probably just volunteer to do for anybody. Like Rodney and I have a very similar aesthetic and we kind of trust each other. And so um the kind of notes that I'm getting or the kind of revisions that I'm doing are almost always um they're almost never sort of shutting down my ideas and making me kind of retool from the beginning. They're more about just kind of heightening the idea that's already there.
Hmm.
Like he'll hear something I'm doing, and it's like, oh, this is great, but what if it sort of went to this further place? And usually if I throw out a cue in a Rodney Asher movie, it's because I wanted to throw it out and start over. So it's a really kind of healthy creative process in that way, even though it's a lot of work and a lot of sleepless nights, but it's a very supportive and fun process, right? That it all the like you get in a cycle sometimes where the notes and the revisions feel sort of almost detrimental to the whole. And it's like, well, if I had known I was this far off, I would have just scrapped this whole thing and started over, as opposed to kind of chipping away at this thing that you never felt was quite right. And clearly, I don't
Mm-hmm.
understand your movie, and there's these sort of conflicts. But with Rodney, it's never like that. I think we've been working together long enough that I kind of get it, and he trusts me, even if he doesn't immediately get what I'm doing. And he's like allows me to sort of go down a road until either I've convinced him or he's convinced me, and it's always very mutual in
Mm-hmm.
that regard. The music versus sound brain. I mean, if I have like a thesis, I think in my career, and an area that I'm happy to explore, it's that line between what is sound and what is music, that very kind of blurred, um, arbitrary line that we all draw in different places. Um, and to me, that's just kind of like that. To me, the distinction is how abstract versus concrete is your sound, right? Music concrete being music made out of the sort of practical concrete sounds of
Mm-hmm.
of our everyday life, and abstract music being like music, sound that doesn't have a corollary to like a thing that you would hear in real life. Um, and playing with that line is really fun, and I'm always kind of looking for opportunities to take something that somebody might consider to be a sound effect in a movie and integrating it into the score,
Mm-hmm.
or taking a musical instrument and making it, you know kind of play something that feels more sound designy and more effecty.
Right.
And so in that sense, I mean, the two brains are the same. Like, it's the two brains of a Venn diagram, right? And there's this sweet spot in the middle where I'm hoping to mostly sort of operate in a practical sense, just because of the way that a post-production workflow is set up. I do have to kind of say, well, today I'm writing a music cue, and I'm going to write a
Mm-hmm.
music cue and finish that, and then I'll bring it into my session. But I'm getting better and better at then sort of adopting both a sound designer's attitude and a music editor's attitude towards the music I've written. Like, nothing is precious at that point, and I kind of start cutting things up and distorting things, and sort of and dealing with the musical material that I've made as if it's just another sound element in the film. So I hope I'm not, just sort of abusing my my power as a supervising sound editor to just make sure my music's really loud. I don't think I'm doing that. I mean, the music is really loud, but that's also what Rodney wants. So um I hope I think it's actually my theater training that sort of allows me to do that, because in the theater world there is only one job really, and it's sound
Mm-hmm.
designer. And
Mm-hmm.
if you go to see a play and there's somebody credited for sound designer, they figured out what speakers to use, they figured out where to put them in the room, they figured out what microphones to put up, they figured out, you know and they made all of the sound effects, and chances are good they wrote all the music too. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That it really is one job, and maybe they had an assistant, and maybe there's a mixer, but that's kind of the team. And on a big
Right.
musical you have sort of other other sort of tiers, but in film there are all these department heads, and each department is sort of operates kind of autonomously in this way that has benefits, right? It means that you get these absolute experts at these various things. I mean, and I didn't do this movie entirely alone. I had a small team of a music editor, and an effects editor and a dialogue editor, and the woman who did the Foley, Joan Rose, and just an absolute legend. Um, but it is a very small team in terms of film sound, and especially when you realize that team includes all of the music as well.
Yeah.
Um, but I think I'm comfortable working that way because of theater, right? Because I'm used to walking into an empty room and being like, okay, I'm in charge of all the sound.
Mm-hmm.
um, and but again, it takes a very like trusting relationship to be able to do that on a film.
Yeah, for sure. You did just kind of do a little bit of this, but would you mind giving just a really brief description of kind of each of your jobs, just to help me kind of, understand all the differences between like sound designer versus sound supervisor and
Sure,
how they're split up.
sure. Well, that was an interesting coming from theater, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think most people, the perception of the name of the title sound designer is, I think we mostly think what it means in theater, which is, oh, that person came up with the idea of how sound is used in this movie and did
Yeah.
it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a sound designer is actually a very like small role on a film. Um, it's really the person who's literally sitting in Pro Tools editing the sounds in place, but the person who actually has the kind of grand vision for how the sound works in the film is the supervisor, is the supervising sound editor, which is a very kind of clinical sounding name. um, and that's also the person who's like excuse me, who's like putting together the department heads, making the budget, and figuring out how to make the whole thing work. But that's usually the person that's actually in conversation with the director about the creative vision of the whole sound world, and then they manage their team. Um, so it's kind of a it. I like that job because it feels more like what I'm used to as a theater sound designer.
Mm-hmm.
But I also like actually editing sounds. So I tend to sort of do both. And usually the way it breaks down is, I mean, because I'll run out of time and energy, right? And I'll have to kind of find people to do certain things. So I brought on Kirsten Carey, who's a sound effects editor and kind of a brilliant guitar player who I used to work with a lot, to do some sound effects editing on this. And then we kind of went through the movie and cued it. And I said, okay, you're going to build that and I'll build this. And we kind of traded things back and forth. And the thing that I love doing that I will never give up when I'm supervising a movie is cutting all the backgrounds. I love cutting backgrounds for some reason, like all of the room tone
Mm-hmm.
and all of the hisses and rumbles and cityscapes and forests and everything that sort of just lie underneath scenes. Somehow to me, that is the thing that teaches me the most about where the movie is taking place and how the movie feels and what and where everything else is sitting. And it's the part that maybe it's just my compositional style, but it has the most to do with music.
Mm-hmm.
um so I do all the backgrounds, a few key sound effects scenes. Kirsten does the rest of the sound effects. This guy Ben did the dialogue editing, which was kind of a challenge in this one, because of all the dialogue was recorded over Skype and Zoom and kind of
Yeah.
sounded pretty bad.
Mm-hmm. I know
Um,
the feeling.
yeah, I mean, we're all so used to it now too.
Yeah.
What's funny is this movie was made. I mean, we were like, when the lockdown hit and when the pandemic really hit, we were about 2 or 3 weeks away from finishing this movie.
Oh,
Like I was
wow.
about to go into a dubbing stage and
Mm-hmm.
knock it out. I think I had like 2 more weeks of like design work in my home studio here, and then we were going to go to on dubbing stage because we were premiering at Tribeca, which then got canceled.
Mm-hmm.
And Rodney said, well, let's just like sort of take a step back and we can fine tune this a little more. I'm sure animation needs more time and I'm sure sound needs more time. And I did. I don't know how I would have done it on the original schedule. But that did allow us to really take our time and really kind of finesse some things that probably would have been roughed in for Tribeca. Um, no, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Uh, I mean, this movie specifically seems like a very much a collaborative process. But I was wondering, I mean, just for other projects where you might not, if if you didn't know the director, like how much autonomy or creative control do you have? Are there times where you want to do one thing as the music person, but then the director or the producer kind of pushes you in another direction?
Well, the director and the producer always run the show. Like usually
Mm.
if you really like dig your heels in and stick to your guns in that way, you get fired.
Right.
And um and that's not to say you weren't right, you know.
Hmm.
But if you don't have the job anymore, what does it
Yep.
matter? I don't know. A lighting designer friend of mine in theater gave me about
Uh-oh. I believe I think you just froze, or
Oh,
maybe
I
I just
froze a little bit.
froze.
Oh, I
Yes.
don't know. It all seemed fine over here, but
Oh, it says my internet connection is unstable.
oh
Oops,
no.
that's on me. Okay. I'm sorry. Could you back up just a little bit?
Sure. Um, well, so usually if you like dig in your heels and refuse to change and you are sure that you're right, I mean, you might be right, but usually you get fired, right? The director
Hmm.
and the producer kind of need to run the show. And I
Yeah.
always prefer to deal with the director if I can, instead of the producer, because that's the person I really work for, even though the producer is writing the checks. Um, I feel like the creative notes kind of should filter through the director. If the producer has notes about the sound, it feels like they should talk to the director, who should then
Hmm.
decide how much they want to communicate them to me. In practice, that doesn't always really work out, and you get, not on this film, not on Glitch in the Matrix, but sometimes producers are really excited about giving a lot of creative notes in
Hmm.
ways that feel sort of inappropriate and damaging to the
Yeah.
process, even.
Hmm.
Um, it's very relatable, and a lot of producers don't. A lot of producers are great. Ross, who produced this movie, is a delight, and I will work with him anytime. Um, but a lighting designer friend of mine in theater gave me about the best uh, sort of advice I think I've ever gotten, which is if you refuse to do a note, or if you say no, I can't change that, or no, I don't want to try that. If a director says, hey, let's try something different, and you say, no, that's impossible, or I can't do that, really all you're saying is, what you're seeing or hearing now, that's the best idea I'm ever going to have, and I'm never going to have a better idea than that. Right?
Okay.
And that's it. I've topped out. And
Hmm.
that's not really a great thing to communicate, you
Yeah.
know?
Hmm.
That's like kind of bad. And it's also just blatantly not true. And if it is true, maybe seek another profession. I don't know. You know, um, that and especially now in the age of computers, right? Like, if I try something else and it's worse than what was there before and we decide to go back, that's incredibly easy.
Hmm.
All that I really lose is time. And time is real. I mean, that's a consideration too, so it is important to say, like, "Wow, I'm going to totally try that. It'll take this amount of time and this other thing will be late because of it," or something like
Right.
that, right?
Right.
Um but uh I thought that was a really interesting way to look at it, right? That even if somebody sort of feels like they're guiding you in a direction that you don't want your work to go or want the show to go, it's always sort of good to be humble and step back and say, well, what is my take on what you just said, and is it better
Hmm.
than what I had in here originally? And I find more often than not it is, and it's always worth
Yeah.
going down those paths.
Um, So, what are some of the differences between scoring for a documentary versus a feature? Because I feel like, I mean, I thought the music for this was super memorable, and all the like clicks of the animated metal heads, you could hear the
Yeah.
metal when they were moving, and I thought that was really cool. But like I don't know, I might just be like totally making this up, but I feel like, a feature, a lot of times you'll have like the music will bring, like when it's the climax, the music's gonna be like really loud and sweeping, whereas the documentary, um, the music sometimes it's there and it can be super memorable and great, but it's less like obtrusive almost. I don't know. I might be making this up again, but
No, you're right. Like, documentaries definitely like have sort of a sound
mhm.
usually and like I feel like a lot of contemporary documentaries kind of, I mean, the dialogue is king. I mean, in every movie, really, the dialogue is, I mean, I don't know. Christopher
Should be
Nolan has some
king,
things to
maybe.
say about that, but yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but and that's kind of how I think about theater too, right? Like, the text is kind of the thing that drives us
Mhm.
along. Not always, but usually, it's like usually my job to make sure that text is really clearly communicated. And if the director has other ideas, I'm happy to obscure it and destroy it and ruin it. But I need to start from a place of making sure that's incredibly clean, and making sure that my every all the work I'm doing is supporting the clarity of that dialogue, and also
Mhm.
supporting the intention and the subtext of it, right? That, like, the sound and the music are sort of dramaturging the dialogue.
Mhm.
um but yeah, a lot of documentaries do kind of have a sound, and the music feels less sort of conceptually linked to the content and more sort of linked to the pacing
Mm-hmm.
almost. And that like it becomes kind of a ticking clock that's just kind of moving us through and making sure that sort of nobody drops the ball. I have another metaphor that I use I'm full of these little stupid metaphors, like visual metaphors for how I think about sound, but I think about sound in plays sometime as if like there's like a balloon in the air and I'm
Mm-hmm.
just trying to keep that balloon from hitting the ground, right? I'm just trying to use sound to kind of propel this thing, and I can let it kind of get almost to the ground, and then I want to sort of knock it back up and things, right? Um, and a lot of documentary music, I think, feels that way. I'm lucky enough to have only worked with Rodney on documentaries. I think that's true. Maybe some short. I think I've done some shorts for other people, but I've never really had to do just kind of a wallpapery documentary
Mm-hmm.
score. Not to say that some of that music isn't phenomenal, but it does seem sort of secondary. Rodney has, I mean, Rodney and I have sort of similar tastes in this way that he loves sort of movies where music can really take over and there can be
Mm-hmm.
these kind of music video-y sequences almost where that's like really it can get really kind of bombastic or just even all encompassing, right? For these moments. And that sort of goes hand in hand really well with my ideas to find sort of ways to ground the abstract music in the concreteness of the world of the film, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't think it's a typical process for documentary. I think it's more like a feature film. The difference between when I work on Rodney's documentaries and when I work on like a narrative film, for me is more about like the practicalities of timing than it is about anything else. That like in a narrative film, you end up paying attention a little more to on-screen action and this technique of what people call Mickey Mousing, right? Of sort of hitting beats and hitting these sort of really like the emotional journeys are just like a lot faster
Mm-hmm.
usually in a
Mm-hmm.
narrative film, right? And so the music needs to be a little more tailored to picture. I've also because of my work on documentaries, I've started doing narrative films in a similar way. If I can, if I get involved early enough, I try to write like I started try to start writing immediately without really looking at picture, right? Just trying to find the emotional tone um and the sort of the palette that I need for that movie. And then when I get a cut, I can start editing that stuff in. And when it doesn't work, I can rewrite and write new connective tissue and things. And that's actually, I've only gotten to do a couple of narrative films that way because usually by the time I'm involved, it's too late, to work that way. But I've been really excited by the results when I get to work that way. It's a lot more work because you start a lot earlier and you write like an hour of music that you throw away. But um, but I think it's worth it for the end result.
And you also, so you talked about this a little bit earlier too, but theater versus film, and that how sound works there. And I was just wondering if you could, um, elaborate on that a little bit more, especially since theater is live and you have like a sound booth and someone is always hitting buttons when someone hits this cue, and how that changes how you approach your job.
Yeah, it's funny. I've had this idea that I was gonna start doing film sound design in the way that I do theater sound design, like build it all live and perform a sound design live to picture someday. I have never
Cool.
tried to do that. To me, like to me, the huge difference in theater and film is site specificity.
Mhm.
Um, right? That like in theater, you are building something for that room only,
Mhm.
really. I mean, unless you're building a touring show, but then you kind of redesign it for every room that you're in a little bit. And in film, you're building something for every room, right? Like there is a site specificity to a movie theater, but and there is a site specificity to home theater, but it's so much more generic than this exact building in this exact room. Like in a
Right.
theater, you can sit in every seat that anybody's ever going to hear the show from, and you can hear the show from literally every perspective. And you can only ever hear it through your own ears, but you get a better sense of like exactly what it sounds like for every seat. But in a film, you just don't really know. Like once you finish it, it goes off into the world. It's more like mastering an album. Um, and something that really something that I think has really taken off in the past 10 months of lockdown and pandemic that I think is good and exciting in the work that I've been seeing. Like theater has all moved online and is being made virtually, now and being made in Zoom um, and it's essentially all these theater makers who have no idea how to make a movie and no interest in making movies and have never wanted to work in film are suddenly making what are essentially films, but they're not. They're different. They are like the good ones are acknowledging the site that they're working in, right? And they're
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging that this is happening in Zoom or on YouTube or on a screen or on a little computer. And even if it's not live, there is like um a way that theater artists are attuned to sight that film artists I think are not. And film artists are so much better at so many other things than theater people ever thought of being. Like I also feel, when I'm working on a theater team with a bunch of theater people and we're essentially making a movie, I really feel the sort of just the practical like lack of like a post-production workflow
Mm-hmm.
that is just
Mm-hmm.
crippling the thing that we're working on at every
Yep.
state. Um, but but there is something really exciting happening that I hope film kind of notices a little too. Like basically all films are sort of 100% naturalistic still. That what the characters see is what the audience sees, and that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Even like fantasy and science fiction films, like there's nothing. The pretense is that you're not watching a film, that you're in the
Right.
world, right? And there's no acknowledgement of the screen, and there's no like, I mean, the films I can think of that break this are very few. I guess a lot of old Japanese movies do it actually, and we just never caught on over here. But like, I mean, the example I always give is like Lars von Trier's Dogville, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is one of the only movies I can think of like in a sort of contemporary kind of Hollywood feeling where the sets that the characters see are not the same the sets as the actors as the audience sees, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we're seeing lines taped on a soundstage and everyone's behaving as if they're in a village, and that kind of like little rule, like that kind of little convention is in every play that anyone's ever seen ever, and it's
Mm-hmm.
in almost no movies. And I find that just absolutely fascinating that that's the way it kind of works. And now that I don't know, I'm seeing all this Zoom theater now that kind of is playing with film in that way, um that I think is really interesting. um yeah, I mean, I guess that's my main sort of conceptual takeaway between the differences of the two. um I also think there's something interesting about in theater is, I'm not going to say easier than film sound design, but the buck doesn't really stop with you in a theater
Mm-hmm.
sound design. If all of your stuff breaks and you're totally silent, there are still actors on a stage and they're gonna go forward, and the audience can still hear things, right? Like something is still happening in the room. Whereas in film, if you go totally silent, it's it's very jarring and very noticeable, right? There is no such thing as totally silent in a theater. And of course, there isn't in a film either, but people know when there's no sound coming out of the speakers anymore, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
everything's coming out of the speakers. There's no acoustic sound
Yeah.
um, that's intentional in a film, right? So it's kind of fun that you get that much control in a film and you get to play with room tones and you get to play with the sort of the feeling that the air has, and that can become a dramatic tool. Whereas in theater, you can only play with the air so much because there is an air noise floor in the theater already, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's I teach theater sound design, and my students, one of my students right now is designing a play, but that's going to be performed in a video game engine and then sort of
Wow.
filmed and packaged as a film. And so it's not really a play and it's not really a film and it's not really a video game,
Mm-hmm.
but it's taking sort of all of these ideas. And you know, and he sort of said at one point, he was like, oh, well, I think, this scene, I really need to get out of the way of the dialogue. So I'm just going to let it be sort of natural. And I was like, you don't get to be silent in this. You have to do something. You have to provide, like, there is no just theater room tone. You have to figure out what that is and you have to make it. Um, which I love, but it is a lot of work. But definitely my like, I don't know, I'm just kind of babbling at this point, but like my work in theater like has really attuned to me to what those room tones can be and what effect they can have too. Because you don't get to decide in theater. Like you walk into a theater and you're like, oh, the air conditioner makes this noise and nobody can
Mhm.
turn it off. So that's just what it's going to sound like.
Yep.
Or like, oh, the moving lights are going to sound like that in that moment and there's nothing we can do about it. I All of those things I've learned to integrate as much as I can. Like if you can't just ignore them and play against them. So I like record moving lights and projector fans and air conditioner groans and these things, and I integrate them into the sound design so that when the acoustic thing happens, it feels intentional, it feels part of it, right?
Mhm.
And I've definitely learned, I mean, I definitely took a huge page from that book working on Glitch in the Matrix because of the way that the interviews were recorded, right? That there are all these like compression artifacts and errors and glitches and
Mhm.
noises and things in those. And I actually went back through them and found more, errors in the parts that we didn't use and went back and sort of put them in um to like to make that world more alive and make it feel more intentional. And I would sample little Skype buffer errors and include them in the music, and
Cool.
things like that, just to kind of integrate
Mhm.
everything.
Yeah, I I've been involved with some virtual theater productions, and like that has it's really upped my appreciation for sound design though, because like, we don't people aren't walking around, you can't hear them walking around, they're just in front of a screen, so we have to get creative. But it's definitely I have a newfound appreciation for sound for
uh,
sure.
a colleague of mine said, well, a great thing about doing theater this way and about this pandemic is that nobody can ever ignore a sound designer again.
Yeah. I mean, it's totally true.
Yeah.
Um do you have a favorite medium to do sound for, or are they all, are they all just different kind of beasts and you can't really rank them or
Yeah, I think I would be I love whatever I'm not doing, at a certain
Yeah.
time. Like I'm like, oh, why am I stuck doing this movie? I want to get back in the theater. Or oh, why am I stuck doing this play? I want to get back in the movies. So I think I would just be sad if I only had to do one thing.
Yeah. Mhm.
I mean, at this point, like everybody, oh my God, I miss people, right? Like
Yeah.
I can't wait to get back into a theater in a way that
Mhm.
feels safe,
Right, right.
which is a whole other thing, right? But like, I can't wait to get back into a theater and like hear sound out of speakers other than these two speakers on my desk, and
Yeah.
like, like, and think about acoustics again, and sort of bring some of the stuff I've learned and have been grappling with over the past 10 months into a
Mhm.
theater context and like see what people do because it's going to be different. It's going to be
Yeah.
really exciting. Yeah.
Mhm. Um, so one thing back to the film that I
Yeah.
noticed, it was like 10 or 11 minutes in, one of the people that y'all had interviewed, was talking about the simulation theory and, um, the idea behind it or whatever. And you have this like music going on in the background and it's very much, you're really in the moment. You're learning about the simulation theory. You're like, oh my gosh, this is so like trippy. And then his dogs start barking and the music completely cuts out and you're just completely taken out of the moment. He like gets his dogs back together, sits back down, and the music immediately starts back up. And I thought that was so funny.
That's my
Um,
favorite. That's my favorite moment in the whole film. I gotta
okay,
say,
that was also one of my favorite
I
moments.
laugh so much at that every time. Yeah.
Um, but I was wondering, how sort of self-aware did you want the score to be? Like, in that first, because that first half of the film really is talking, it's people who are talking about the simulation theory, which of course a lot of people believe in, but then sometimes, some other people will watching it and be like, wow, these people are crazy. Um, but did you want the score to reflect any sort of self-awareness, like I said, and then also what was your take on some of the theories that were put
Huh.
forth?
Well, um, another thing that I quote all the time, that was kind of a light bulb moment for me when I heard it was I heard this interview with Jad Abumrad, who makes Radiolab,
Mhm.
who they were talking about film music, and he said, well, the music in a movie is the character that knows the most about what's going on.
Oh.
I've started to resolve that really rang true to me, and I've started to think about my music when it's doing its job, right, it knows what's going on, but it also doesn't have human concerns, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a
Mm-hmm.
character. So it's not going to tell you that this moment is sad or this moment is, funny or anything, right? But what it is going to tell you is, oh, somebody just learned something. This moment is important. And I'm going to leave it up to you of how you think this moment is important or what you think they learned. But I'm just going to nudge characters and audience in different directions. And I kind of, decide, oh, am I writing for characters? Am I writing for audience? Am I writing for actors? Who am I writing for right now? And like whose journey am I thinking about? Um, like that moment specifically with the music dropping out for the dogs. I mean, it just felt to me like the music was propelling, like it was, that cue is almost maybe the most like sort of a typical sort of ticking clock documentary cue in this movie. One of the few. I mean, I still need to do that. Like you still need those. That's a really
Mm-hmm.
important function of music in a movie like this. Um, and the dogs just felt like they sort of broke the world for a second, right? And the music needed to reflect that. And like we needed to just sort of derail the whole train for a second, deal with the dogs, and then and then come back. One of my I had to make what's called an M&E mix for this
Mm-hmm.
movie, a music and effects mix, which is something that is part of just a deliverables package with international distribution. It's for um, other countries that speak other languages if they in case they want to do a dubbed version of the film. So it's just the film without any of the dialogue but with all of
Mm-hmm.
the music and the sound effects. And one of the things you have to do when you do that is you have to go back through the whole movie like line by line as you're taking out the dialogue and find any moments where there's some sort of sound information, like there's some sort of story being told with sound that's baked into the dialogue track that you're accidentally getting rid of
Mm-hmm.
when you mute that. And that was a big moment that I had to go back because his dogs and his line overlap completely. So
Oh,
I had
wow.
to do a whole new sound design pass. I had to sound design his dogs for that moment
Wow.
just for the so if anybody ever dubs this movie and you see it in another language, the dogs will sound different because
Oh
I
my
had to make
gosh.
them I had to make
That's
them just for that
awesome.
purpose. It was really fun.
That's great.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so my last question. Do you have a favorite film score of all time?
Gosh, this answer changes every time somebody asks it, depending on the day. There's so many that I love. Um,
Hello,
oh,
kitty.
oh, you're getting in on the show. Speaking of pets distracting from interviews. Um, um, yeah. You know, um, the answer I usually give, the thing that always pops to mind first is Francois Eudes Chanfreau's score for Inside. But
Hmm.
I also, which I listen to so much, and I think is an incredibly beautiful score that like nobody really talks about. Oh, don't step on those! You're going to stop the record. Yeah. It's nice that you want to be included. Oh, do you want to say something? That would be great.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
good
So
boy.
sweet.
Yeah. Um, but another score that not too many people talk about that was like hugely influential to me, which is funny because it's actually a movie that I've never seen. Um, is Christopher Young's score for The Vagrant from '92. This kind of Bill Pullman horror movie about a vagrant that I hear is not really worth watching. So I've heard the score a lot, and I've been sort of advised to stay away from the movie. I'm sure I'll watch it someday, but the score is really unique. I love horror scores that find kind of a unique take that don't just feel like kind of stingers and risers and clusters. Or now, I mean, the Carpenter sort of throbbing synth thing has become really a cliche. And I love anyone that kind of breaks that. And Inside and The Vagrant both kind of break that in different ways. I mean, the score for Inside is really one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. And you would never think that it was for a horror film. And I would never have thought in a million years to score that movie in that way. The music is exactly in my taste and feels like music that I would have wanted to write, though I'm not maybe as talented as Francois Chanfreau was, but that's the kind of music that very much sits in my wheelhouse and really appeals to me very much. Um, but I would never have been brave enough to suggest that score should have accompanied that film, and I'm so glad somebody was, because it's so beautiful in ways you don't expect. And the Vagrant music, I mean, it sounds like, I don't know, it sounds like if Steve Reich wrote a horror movie score or something. It's like tiny little ensemble and tons of weird sampled like concrete sounds, like typewriters and water and little sort of clicks and clacks and bells played on samplers, and breath. There's a lot of sampled breath in it, and it sounds like, you know, post minimalist American contemporary New York, like bang on a can style music, but for a horror film. And it's really exciting and really, really beautiful. It's definitely my favorite Christopher Young score, and really hard to find. It took me a while to track down that CD.
Well, I'll have to check those out.
Yeah, both
For
both
sure.
pretty fun. Yeah.
So those are all my questions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I really did enjoy this so much. And the
Oh,
movie was great and so interesting and kept me glued to the screen.
oh, it's a
Um,
fun one. Yeah, it
mhm.
was so much fun to work on. And yeah, and my pleasure. I'll sit and rattle on about this stuff all day, any day. So,
Yeah, so thank you again.
of course. Yeah, anytime.
Okay, sorry, I had to give like a little pause. Okay, I'm gonna
Yeah.
stop the recording.